Hello again, and welcome back to our Naruto walkthrough. Today we will be completing the most critical side quest. Our main character for today will be the Jūbi. Let's get started. We are first going to compare the two Jūbi Jinchuriki we saw in action. Can you have a look at them and see if you can find a couple of discrepancies? The first discrepancy is, after absorbing the Jūbi, Obito was unable to use Kamui. With Madara on the other hand, Kamui worked like a charm. Now, if this were only Kamui, we could argue that it didn't work with Obito and worked with Madara, because Obito was trying to phase through matter, he was trying to become intangible, whereas Madara was trying to completely teleport to the Kamui dimension, which is a different application of the technique. But there is more than just Kamui. What is the other discrepancy? When Obito absorbed the Jūbi, he was initially overwhelmed by its power. It actually took several chapters for Obito to manage to stabilize his form, regain control over his own mind and his own body, as you can see here in chapter 640. With Madara on the other hand, controlling the Jūbi posed absolutely no problem. He was instantly in full control of himself. And now this is a bit weird, because the Jūbi Madara absorbed actually should have been more overwhelming. Obito's version was lacking its two most powerful components, the Hachibi and the Kyubi. Madara's version, on the other hand, was almost complete. So if anything, Madara is the one who should have had more trouble controlling this overwhelming power. Of course, you could argue that Madara is just more powerful and more skilled than Obito, and yes, he is to some extent, but not to the point of explaining such a discrepancy. Between Kamui and this, we can see that the Jūbi seems easier to control with Madara than with Obito. Now, can you correlate those discrepancies to a character's goal? Well, if the Jūbi wants to be revived at full power, and in its true form, that is Kaguya, then those discrepancies suddenly make sense. Madara is a more suitable vessel for Kaguya, since he is a genuine Rinnegan user and an Indra reincarnate. So in order to trigger Kaguya's revival, the Jūbi would want Obito to fail and Madara to succeed. That would explain why the Jūbi is making itself harder to control with Obito, and why the Jūbi, for example, allowed Madara to go to the Kamui dimension in order to recover his second Rinnegan, which was needed to start the infinite Tsukiyomi. So maybe, contrary to what we think, the Jūbi is not a mindless beast at all. Let's dive a little deeper. So, what is the persona the Jūbi displayed throughout the novel? Well, in its Gedomazo form, it behaved as an inanimate statue who just obeyed the Rinnegan user. And in its Jūbi form, it seemed easy to control, and when it did act on its own, it behaved like a mindless beast. As you can see here, even the Kyubi believed that the Jūbi had no feeling or intelligence of its own. But is the Jūbi truly mindless? Well, obviously not, otherwise we wouldn't be making this video. So the Jūbi's lack of intelligence is an act. Let us continue our investigation. Can you have a look at the way the Jūbi fought after being summoned and before being absorbed by Obito? And please try to find a pattern. Well, if the Jūbi wants to be absorbed by Madara, then, much like Madara in the previous episode, the Jūbi would want to protect the alliance to some extent in order to ensure the Alliance would have enough firepower to defeat Jubito, should Obito manage to absorb it first. And as it turns out, we have a pattern of the Jūbi doing exactly that. Here, for example, you can see the Jūbi is only starting to channel a big Jūbi Dama only when B is ready to intercept it. A bit later, the Jūbi only starts channeling an even bigger and more dangerous Jūbi Dama only after Minato is ready to join the scene and use Hirashin to teleport the projectile away. So you can see this pattern of the Jūbi trying to look dangerous and use powerful techniques, but never doing any serious harm to the Alliance, a bit like Madara before him. There is a specific brilliant move the Jūbi played. Can you find it? Chapter 632. This is the move. Bam! What a fantastic move. Beautiful. So the Jūbi is caught in the Hokage barrier, and it tries and fails to blast its way through. What a fantastic move. Can you see the three things this accomplishes for the Jūbi? Well, first, the Jūbi remains sealed within the barrier, and as a result, is unable to cause more casualties to the Alliance. Secondly, even more important, the Jūbi looks stupid. As you can see here, even Mifune is laughing at it, as it injured itself. Now this is vital, because at this stage of the novel, the Jūbi wants to make sure that no one, and especially neither Obito nor Madara, is going to suspect that it might actually be a sentient and intelligent creature. So it acts stupid. Finally, in the same logic, by failing to get through a barrier, the Jūbi makes it seem it has absolutely no knowledge or skill when it comes to seals. And this is important as well, because in the relationship between a Biju and a Jinchuriki, it's really a matter of sealing to decide who is going to control who. So, by making it seem the Jūbi has no idea how to deal with a seal, it gives the idea that it will be easy for its Jinchuriki to control. So, Obito and Madara are going to be confident in absorbing it. What a fantastic move. So, as we found out, the Jūbi was making an effort to cause as little casualty as possible to the Alliance, while still making it seem it was fighting seriously. And it also made sure to look stupid. But there is more. There's one more thing we need to find. Can you find a pattern with what happened to two major antagonists as they were about to win? Let's start with Obito. Realistically, after he absorbed the Jūbi, and after he managed to stabilize his body, Obito should have been unstoppable. No one on the battlefield could match his power. And yet, as he was getting closer to winning, Obito was assaulted with flashbacks. He saw his past. He saw an alternate timeline when he didn't join Madara and became Hokage instead. He had visions of Rin rejecting him, etc. Eventually, overwhelmed by those flashbacks, Obito lost his resolve and ended up going down without a fight. What an interesting development. Now the question is, where did those flashbacks come from? Obito himself seemed to believe that Naruto was triggering them, but that would be surprising because Naruto is not a genjutsu user. So let us try to find an alternate theory. let us find a pattern. Can you find another character who, in similar circumstances, was assaulted with similar flashbacks? The other character is Nagato. In a previous episode, we saw that Nagato had a fantastic plan to murder Obito and get the Jūbi for himself. This plan involved having Pain lose on purpose against Naruto, and then Nagato himself capturing Naruto in order to bait Obito into a trap. Everything was going exactly according to the plan. And then what happened? Well, flashbacks happened. Much like Obito, Nagato was suddenly assaulted with flashbacks of his childhood, of his memories with Jiraiya, until eventually his resolve broke and he decided to give up, take his own life, and believe in Naruto. Now, what is the pattern between Nagato and Obito? Well, just like Obito, Nagato was potentially about to win. He was linked to the Jūbi, not as a Jinchuriki, but the chakra receivers who are linking him to the Gedomazo. And finally, Nagato was someone the Jūbi did not want to win, because the Jūbi, as we established, wants to be absorbed by Madara, Kaguya's true vessel. And by the time Nagato could have captured Naruto, Madara was nowhere near ready to be revived. Edo Madara hadn't even been patched up by Kabuto just yet. So the Jūbi couldn't allow Nagato to win, and all of a sudden, the flashbacks happened. So we have a pattern, and we can conclude that Obito and Nagato were actually sabotaged by the Jūbi. So the Jūbi was the one sending those flashbacks. And this is huge. This completely changes the story. Because as it turns out, Naruto's talk had little to do with Obito and Nagato losing their resolve. It was the Jūbi sabotaging them. And now that we have established that the Jūbi can influence its host, we can also understand Madara's weird behavior. Did you spot this discrepancy? As an Edo ninja, Madara, as we saw in the previous episode, was playing calculated and careful moves. After absorbing the Jūbi, however, he got reckless, unhinged, and even a bit delusional. The best example would be this scene. Madara is sharing voices, and he just decides to obey. He doesn't stop to wonder where the voice is coming from exactly, and he doesn't realize that it's weird if either the Jūbi or the Divine Tree is talking to him, because just a minute ago Madara believed the Jūbi had no mind of its own. But he doesn't stop to think about it. He just has a loss and keeps going. And now that we know the Jūbi can influence its host from within, then it makes sense. If the Jūbi was, for example, sending Madara visions of himself saving the world, then it would have worsened Madara's messianic delusions, which is why Madara would have thought, for example, yeah, of course I'm hearing a voice. I'm the Messiah. God is talking to me. There's no problem here. We don't have the details, but clearly in that scene, Madara is under the Jūbi's influence. Alright, time to conclude the episode. Today, we have learned that the Jūbi manipulated its host from within, and was in fact one of the most intelligent characters in the novel, second only to Samehada herself. Before we move on to Samehada's quest, however, we still have a couple of side quests to complete. Next episode will focus on Zetsu.